Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking and our Start Woodworking course. This series is for those of y'all that are just getting into the craft, might not have a lot of money, and don't have a lot of space to build stuff, maybe in the corner of a garage or something like that. We are going to be using a very basic set of hand tools plus one power tool, the bandsaw. And this is the fourth class in that series, and in it we're going to explore the holy trinity of hand tools: the chisels, the saw, and the plane. And the project we're going to do to explore those is building the toolbox that we're going to use to house all the tools we'll use for the rest of the course, minus the bandsaw. Now, in the first video in this series, we kind of explored what woodworking tools, both powered, hand, and stationary, did by examining the interaction between their blades and the wood fibers. In the second video, we got into actually building stuff when we built the workbench that we're using in the entire series. The third video was more of a deep dive into the individual tools we'll be using in the series, with a extreme exploration of bandsaws, the only power tool and the most complex tool we'll be using, and the simplest tool we used, a sloyd knife. And as I said, in this video, we're exploring planes, saws, and chisels. Though it's become a recurring theme that as I finish up making the production and I start editing it, I find out that there's just too much information in it to have it in one video. So I'm breaking this toolbox build up into 3 videos. The first one being the largest, where we basically build the carcass of it. So enjoy, learn, explore, and in the end, I hope you will get out in your new shop and make yourself a toolbox. The biggest tool we are going to be putting in our toolbox is this saw. Now the hand plane is pretty close size-wise, but the saw is just a tad bit taller. So this is the main dimensions we're going to be going by. Now I'm designing this box for the tools we are using in this video, so this is the saw we're doing. If you're using some other tools, or maybe you're going with a Japanese tool, size it for the tools you're going to be using. But this right here is, right around 25 inches, and it is going to sit roughly 5.5 inches high. Now that 5.5 inches is a critical part, because that will allow us to use lesser expensive material. You can always get longer boards, and the price doesn't increase that much when you go longer, but if you start going wider, the price does jump fairly quickly. I've got some 1x8s here, this being 5.5 inches. That will give us enough room for having a bottom and a top lid, so it should be just fine. Now 1x8 is actually, a little bit less than 8 inches, and it's not full inches thick. It's about 3/4 of an inch. And we talked about that in the prerequisite course of why the things are sized that way. So, with that in mind, I know the thickness is going to add up to 3/4 on each side. We need at least 25 inches in the middle. So add 1.5 inches to that. That comes out to 26.5. Let's just make it around 28. That'll give us a little bit of playroom. And because I kind of like proportions, if we cut the boards down to 7 inches, so it has a height of 7 inches, well, we can now have a ratio of 7 here, 14 here, 28. That's a 1, 2, 4 ratio. Now that should get us something that's big enough that we can put all the tools we have today and probably give you lots of expansion room in the future. It is going to be a pretty nice size small toolbox, but it'll work. So the first thing I need to do is cut down boards into 28-inch sections. So I'm going to cut them in 30 because my first step is rough cutting, and it's never very precise. And the two sides being 14 inches, eventually those you cut them in half. So let's cut down some 30-inch pieces. Now I like using these little bar stools I bought at, I believe it's Target. They're like $7 or $8 each. I have quite a few of them because I can also do plywood on top of them. I don't really care if I accidentally cut into them. And they're about the right height for a saw bench. Maybe a little bit too tall for me, but nice enough because they serve multiple purposes. But when you're sawing something like this, and this is kind of the same deal as I had with my hand planes, in that I do have an entire video on sawing techniques. So if my little summary right here isn't quite enough for you to feel confident in it, I really do suggest going on those. I actually have two videos. The first one's the general one, and it's the skills we will use in this series. And then the second one is more for some specialty saws. But anyways, one of the ideas is that you want to keep your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist, and your finger all in line. It's kind of like a choo-choo train with those little rods that go around the wheels and stuff like that. If any of these come out of line, not only will you eventually be sore because you're working your ligaments wrong, but you're going to go off the line. I also will kind of go across my body so that my eyeball is also in line, and that kind of keeps everything together. So position something's right there so that you can put your body weight on it. I keep my shoulders about 45 degrees. Now these saws are actually designed to cut at about 45 degrees. They aren't really designed to cut this way or low, but you can start either way. And I will start on the toe for the simple reason it's very hard to put pressure down here. The closer you get to your hand, the easier it is to put pressure down. So if you just kind of nibble it back, I've got my thumb as a guide, nibble it back to get the saw started, maybe come back a couple times. Once the saw is started, just focus on making nice, smooth, long cuts. You don't have to go fast. The saw will do the work. And then just watch the line. Now, here is a trick for sawing to the line. Okay? Ready? I want you to really put this into memory. When you go off the line, stop, figure out why, and get back on the line. It's really that simple. But time and time again, when I see new students, they get off the line, and for some reason, they just keep sawing, and you will get farther and farther and farther from the line if you do that one. If you happen to get off, the simplest thing to do would be to drop your saw down, and when you resaw it, kind of lightly saw it till you get back on the line, and then bring it back up to that 45 degrees. And really, once you get the line established, the saw wants to track straight. The curve kind of wants it to go straight. Now these are rough cuts, so if you get off a little bit, don't stress about it. This is one of those times we shoot for accuracy, but if we mess up a little bit, not that big a deal. Now a 10-foot board, 30 inches, that leaves us basically 4 per board. So we have 8 30-inch boards here, which if I do my math correctly, that gives us 2 that we could screw up on and not have to stress about it. But this brings us to a point I want to kind of drive home. Pretty much every single project that you design, you're going to have some kind of reference edge. That's the line that everything else is based off of. For example, when I make a slab top workbench, I might do this different from a lot of other builders, but my reference edge is actually the bottom of the tabletop. Because a lot of times I will build the tabletop first, laminating it together or giving a giant slab, and I pick the worst side of that slab to be the bottom, and I will make sure that is dead flat, or at least it is flat where my tenons are going to go. And that becomes the reference line for the entire project. The very last thing I do after the entire thing is assembled is flatten that top. And I know a lot of people will think about, well, I want the top to be at 34 inches or something like that. That's the last thing I'm going to do. If I have this as a reference, well then I on these legs, I might have a blank this big. I'll draw a shoulder line right there, and then I will saw off my tenons. Easy peasy. I'll even leave them long. I can then measure down this far to figure out where I need to make the mortise for these tenons right here. And I will not worry about the length of the leg. That being my reference, I've got my measurement here. I can cut my tenon however deep I cut it there, assemble the entire table, and then size it to get the top flat. And then at the last thing you do, you kind of cut off the legs so that it won't rock in case there's any twisting or anything like that with the bench. Once you get it sitting flat, that's when you take your tape measure, and obviously you get it close, but you take your tape measure, draw your line. I needed 34 inches, so there's your plane. And you plane down to that line. So, as strange as it sounds, the floor is never my reference. The top's never really my reference. It's always going to be something like the bottom of a table so that everything can come out from it. Now, in this particular project, I kind of base all my measurements off the bottom of the box. Okay, it's going to have feet coming down to prop it up a little bit, and obviously we're going to have the height there. But I'm going to start out getting the bottom base of it dead perfect so that everything else that goes from there can reference it. I do not really care if the top is cosmetically smooth or straight or anything like that, because that's one of the last steps I will do is flatten that top and then put the bars going across it. When I'm building the case, the bottom and everything like that, all that has to be perfect from the get-go is that bottom line. So grab your hand plane, it's time to start joining some edges. Now I have a camber on the blade, meaning it is slightly curved here. It's deepest in the middle. So that allows me to take a little bit more off of the wood depending upon where I am on the curve. So the first thing I'm going to do is, actually the grain's running this way, so I'm going to reverse the board. I'm just going to make sure I can get a complete shaving going all the way across it. That'll tell me that it is straight. Once I've got the full length shaving, now I can back off the blade a tad bit so it's taking a thinner shaving. See, it skipped in the middle on that time with a thinner shaving. The thinner shaving just makes it that much straighter. And I want to take a full length shaving all the way across. There we go. Nice full length shaving. Now we can figure out if it's going to be flat, 90 degrees. Now, here's the deal. See, it's a little bit tall on this side. So if I come over and I move my plane over a little bit, now the center of it is going to come off the side. I'm using my finger as a fence to guide it, and I'm taking more off of one side than the other to flatten it out. Another pass. This time I come over a little bit, and then the last one I take it right down the center. Check it again. One more time. It looks like it's like just a sliver of light. Just a little bit over to the side. Now, skill development takes time, and I promise you, you spend a few months doing different projects, and then maybe every project or two you have to joint a board. Eventually you're going to develop a feel for that 90 degrees. So, I mean, you'll be able to hit it really, really quickly. But if you're not feeling confident, here's another trick you could do so that you can get a very nice straight edge. I've clamped two boards, one on top of the other. Notice it's overhung a little bit. We can actually use a nice flat bench in the sides of our planes because they are fairly straight up and down. And by lifting it up here, you get it towards the center of the blade. So now, to joint the board, just run it along the side like that. Whenever you get a nice shaving, undo it, swap out to the other side, joint the other board, and then to test it out, you can take the two boards, and if you put the two jointed edges together, should fit nice and tightly there, but the line will be nice and straight. That tells you you have two 90 degrees. They're really good, really good. That would be a very good joint, glue joint. Now, many times when you joint one side, well, basically it kind of gets it out of parallel with the other side of the board, or you've eliminated some warp or twist or something like that, but this side is still going to have it. So it's nice at this point in time to use that freshly jointed side against the fence and cut all your boards to an equal length. I'm going to cut these all down to a little over 7 inches. Remember, they started at about 7.5 inches. So we now have 8 boards that have one side, that's the last a tool really needs to touch it. We jointed it, it's perfect. That is our reference side. And this is one of those situations why I think a bandsaw is a great power tool for a small shop. A lot of people would have done that cut on a table saw because it would have given you a better finish. I mean, it would have made it parallel, so this side could have been jointed just as well as this side. The bandsaw leaves a rough surface. But that doesn't really matter, because whenever we finish making the box, we're going to use a hand plane to level out the top, so this is not going to be the last time a tool touches this part of the board, so it doesn't need to be finish ready. Our reference edge does, and that's why when I built the table, I finished the bottom of the table first because that was going to be my reference edge. We have now finished the bottoms of each one of these boards. That is now our reference edge. So now I want you to pick out 4 boards. Let's just call them the best looking boards out of the bunch. And we are going to we're going to cut these down for the sides of our project. And if we pick out 4 boards, well then, if we screw up 1 or 2 of them, we can still use those screwed up boards later in the project on shorter pieces, but we get 4 chances to get the sides dead on perfect. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn to my knife because it's my preferred way to get accurate marks. And I'm going to come over and I will mark, let's say, a 1/2 inch. Basically, just pick one side of the board where you want to get rid of most of the trash. We're going to be cutting out 28 inches or a little over 28 inches, and remember we cut these to 30 inches, so we have 1 inch of free play on either side. Many times it's trashed or you got a slight crack over there. So I know this is my reference side because it is a smooth jointed side. This side right here has my bandsaw marks. So I want to mark this side of the board, my reference side, and make a really deep knife mark. Okay? Then come over and measure over however far you want to go on this side over here. I'm actually going to go 28.5 inches just to prove a point that this can be a random number. I could have been anything over 28 inches. And I want all my boards to be identical. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to flip this over, take another board, make sure I have my reference edge, which is the jointed one, and I can use those two marks to kind of position where it best looks on this board, and then place my knife into that mark of the first board and transfer my line over. Place it into the first one's knife and then transfer it over. Make it nice and deep. That way I know these two distances are going to be identical. So it really doesn't matter how accurate I was on this one, as long as all my other ones are going to be matched perfectly to it. So grab another board, repeat the process. Then flip the board so that the reference edge is away from you. Take your square, find your knife line, bring your square up to it, and then make 3 marks. A light one, a heavier one, and a heavier one. Flip your square, do the same to the other side. And notice we are referencing off that reference edge. If we do the same on all of them, even if our square was not perfectly, well, by doing the same, exactly the same, all the boards, well, the angles will end up being the same. So the errors will complement each other versus fight each other. Now we get to use a bench hook. So I went and grabbed the other piece of plywood that I used to make the bench hook, just because it's the same height of my bench hook. Then drop my bench hook over here. This right here allows the board to stretch all the way across my bench, so while I'm working it over here, it's not tilting on me. Now when you are first starting out, there are a lot of cheats and a lot of machines you can use to cut a perfect 90 degrees. You can even build a sled for your bandsaw, and I have videos on doing that kind of stuff to help you make it 90 degrees. It's also one reason why I think the table saw is so popular, especially in home shops, is because it really is kind of easy to set up a jig and then just kind of cut your 90 degrees. You can get it right there. But you don't develop as much skill when you do that one. I'm going to ask you not to... Oh, here's another one. I mean, these are only like $5. If you want to cut a perfect 90 degrees, you can actually use that as a fence for your handsaw. I'm going to ask you not to do any of those tricks and freehand cut a perfect 90 degrees. Because all you're doing is cutting to the line. And that really is as simple as coloring in the lines, like when you're in kindergarten and stuff like that. You know, those first few drawings, purple is going all over the hippopotamus. Inside and outside, it just looks like it was hit by a paint bucket. But by the time you're in first grade, you know, you're able to color in the lines. It's a skill you can really rapidly learn. And if you can develop that now at the very beginning, all of a sudden, this becomes an asset. Whereas if you get dependent upon jigs and machines and stuff like that, you'll end up spending so much time setting those up, when it could be, you just pick this thing up, draw a line, saw a line. It's something you will hear over and over and over. Draw the line, saw the line. It's something hand tools can do very quickly that a lot of times power tools can't. Now this project is designed to give you 8 shots at getting a perfect 90 degree saw cut. You got 4 of these boards and we only need 2 of them to be perfect. So you can take your best 2. So if you screw it up a little bit, don't worry about it. I am going to draw a pencil line in my knife line, and this is actually going to make it harder for me to cut the line because it's a bigger line, but it's the only way it's going to show up on the camera. So what we want to do is use our finger on the saw. We're going to point our finger here. We're going to have a very, very loose grip. It is just literally holding right here. These 2 fingers are just there to keep my wrist relaxed. Okay. This finger is going to control direction. This hand propulsion. So I will come over here. I will place my finger right there, right next to that line. I don't want to be on the line. I want to be right next to it. And then I'm just going to nibble. I'm going to nibble. Okay. As you breathe out, blow your sawdust out. I'm going to nibble my way back. If I get off the line somehow, what do? I stop sawing, I get back on the line, I continue to nibble. Nibble my way all the way down the board. I'm keeping it in this point and slowly working my way back. Look at that. Once I've established a trough all the way across my board, it's hard for me to get off the line. That's all I was trying to do, is establish that trough right there for my saw to sit in. Okay? Now once you have that, you can actually determine straight up and down by the balance point. A saw wants to saw plumb. It does not want to saw at an angle. So if you loosen your wrist bent up, you can kind of feel it out. Then all you want to do is take nice, slow, long passes. Give the saw lots of time to let the sawdust fall out of the gullet. Nice, long passes. Little game I would play with my students. I would give a piece of candy to the person who had the sawdust fall farthest from the bench, from their bench hook, because that meant they were using the full width of the saw blade. Candy is not that just nice, slow. You don't have to be fast. You're in no hurry. This is just a hobby for you. You are not earning a living at this. So just take it nice and slow. And eventually, you'll get through the whole board. So what if it took you a whole minute? You want to check your work? There you go. Let gravity do the work. Let gravity be your guide for plumb, and just take it nice and slow, and everything will work out fine. So once you've cut all 4 boards, go ahead and pick out the best 2, and then set the other 2 aside. And then grab one of your 30-inch boards, and go ahead and do the same exact process, and cut you 2 14-inch pieces. Don't use the ones you practice on to make your square cuts, because they'll be a little bit short to get 2 14-inch pieces, and I don't want you to end up with an off cut that we won't be able to use later on in the project. Those 2 pieces that you practice on, we will be using for the top and bottom. So now for the fun stuff, the joinery. And I will tell you, even with all my power tools and stuff like that, I still enjoy doing the joinery by hand. All this other machinery you see us using is just to get the parts dimensioned so that we can start having fun with our saws and chisels. Now the joinery we're going to be using is a box joint, and a lot of people associate that with manufactured stuff, but it actually dates way back before then. People were using box joints along with pegs to assemble boxes or cases or anything like that with no glue, and it's because it can combine both a mechanical and a glue bond strength to it. And it's actually very traditional in Japanese joinery, especially with mass-produced stuff they were doing, like boxes. So pull up a stool and grab some marking tools. You're going to see me using a pencil, but I would highly recommend you use a knife. I'm only using a pencil because knife lines don't show up on the camera very well. And then you're going to need something to mark 90 degrees. A cheap plastic square like I showed you in our introductory set of tools. will work just fine. Even a little, 4-inch square you can buy over there. Even if they're a little bit out, this is such a short distance, it's not going to make that big a difference. You're going to see me use this thing right here. This is a little shop-made tool. I have videos on how to make them, and I even sell them on my website. And what it does is it has a 90-degree marking right there, and it also has 1-in-7 for me cutting out dovetails, so it can go either way. I end up using this 90-degree quite a bit, and the overhang is big enough that I can mark across two boards, two 3/4-inch boards at the same time. Anyways, that's the end of the sales pitch. So we're going to need these to mark the lines out, and because I hate doing math, grab some dividers and that marking gauge I mentioned earlier. Though, if you don't have a marking gauge, don't stress about it. Marking gauge is to draw a line across here. You can do the same exact thing with a square. So this board is roughly 7 inches. It's actually a little bit over 7 inches, but it's close enough for government work. And I kind of like the idea of having 1-inch fingers. And because it is over 7 inches, just a little bit, I can't use a ruler. So the easy way to make even indentations is with dividers. So I can come over here and set it to about 1 inch, guesstimating, and then just start walking it off. Drop it on the side and start counting out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, that is way off because I need to do one more step. So let's come in quite a bit this time. Tighten it up, and then again walk it off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now that error right there, that error is 7 times my error. So I'm going to guesstimate what 1/7 of that is. Open it up, then walk it off again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Once again, 1/7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right on the line. So at this point in time, I'll come up fairly close to the front, and every step I'm just going to press down. 1, rotate it, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And without changing anything, go ahead and do the edge of both boards. So you're going to do this 4 times. Now, if you find that for some reason it's a little bit off, that's okay. We are really only looking for a visually even step on this design. If you want to do odd steps, that's up to you. Next, I'm going to take my marking gauge. I'm going to loosen everything up. I'm going to place one board over, and I'm going to just drop it down. So it's going to perfectly size the gauge to the thickness of the board. And that is one of the big advantages of having a flat cutter, where the screw that attaches it is recessed, because I can drop it down like that and quickly set depth. And from here, we're going to just come over to the edge and run our line all the way around. Excuse me, I mean, not all the way around, just on the faces. Now you will find that if you tend to push off, you tend to move around a little bit more. You're going to be a lot more stable to take the board in your hand, put it up against your body, and pull toward yourself. I don't understand the body mechanics of why that is, why it's less accurate pushing than it is pulling. It just is. And don't change this setting, because we're going to use these on the long boards too later on. Now once you've got that done, come back, drop your pencil in that indentation you left, take whatever gauge you're using to draw a straight line, bring it up to that, and then mark a line down to that baseline. do that for all four sides. All we are doing is marking the face at this time, because remember me talking about earlier, kind of order of operations, making things efficient for yourself? This is one of those times. It's just easier to mark the faces when they're flat on your bench. Okay, now when you do box joints, it's always nice to have a negative number of fingers, because you're going to be removing every other one, and for some reason humans like symmetry. Now we're doing the short pieces just because of a future step. It will make transferring the lines easier. I like to start out whichever first piece I do having solid ends, because it makes the transfer later on easier. So mark on every other one an X, and that will give you a solid piece on the top and bottom of both of these boards. Now go ahead and drop one of them with the pencil lines facing you in your vise, and leave it a little bit proud. Once you get it in, step back and try to adjust it so it's as close to vertical as possible. Remember, when we use gravity to find plumb on those cross cuts, well, it's not as important here, but it's a nice field to develop. Now, if your surface doesn't look as smooth as this right here, this is a studio trick. After I cut it up, I did smooth that out, because I found that the rough surface didn't transfer the lines to the camera as much. So what I'm about to do now is, I have a line on my face on this side. You can't see it in the camera. I'm going to put my pencil right on that line and then transfer it across the top. Now this application, unlike earlier when we were working on the workbench, it's easier in the vise because it's flat. And once again, transfer your X's so you don't accidentally cut off something you actually did want to keep. Now, for the time being, we are not going to be cutting on those lines. I want you to spend the next 5 minutes of your time practicing sawing. And I only want you to focus on two things, okay? Getting the saw started and using the full length of the saw blade, okay? Don't worry about cutting straight or anything like that. Just stop before your baseline. And all I want you to do is come over, place the saw on there, lift it up. I'm exaggerating right here, so you're starting on the far side, and focus on sawing across the top, sawing down to that baseline, and then riding it up and not going over on the baseline on the other side. Two things we're focusing on is the start and using the full stroke, and we're going to use all this space in between these lines as practice material. So come over, give it a few strokes, focus on coming down to your baseline, riding it up and not going past your baseline. Reset, come back over, a few strokes. Don't worry about following on any line. I just want you to get used to starting the straw and then using the full blade. And by the end, now that's a good 20 practices right there, and we haven't come close to any of our lines. Now go ahead, flip that board over, get it as close to vertical as possible, just like we did last time. Transfer those layout lines from the front to the top. This time, I want you to draw some lines straight across the top, maybe 4 or 5 per section. Go ahead and make them nice and thick and dark lines. Okay, don't come close to either of those. And just in the sections that we're going to be removing. Now, sawing across the top is a lot harder than sawing down the face in terms of accuracy, because you are actually going across the grain. So we have basically 3 sections, 1, 2, 3. In this first section, I want you to attempt to draw on the left side of the lines. So when we are done, you will have a saw cut coming here and going across, but all the lead will be remain. On this one, do it on the right side of the line. and then try whatever you want on this side. So I'm going to come over here. I'm using this finger as a guide to move my blade over. I line it up right next to my line. I nibble to get started. Come across the top and then down. Straighten up. Lead still there. A little bit too much white. So come over to the next one. Practice again. Light touch to get it started. Maybe you have to drag back a little bit. Get it started. Follow along that line across the front. And then just practice your long strokes. Do that all the way across here, here, and here. So, are you seeing that even with just this little bit of practice that we have right here, how much easier it is? Even for me, who really hasn't done much saw work in the past 6 or 7 months, it's getting easier every single time. So imagine if you did a few projects like this, how much more accurate you will be. This is a very steep learning curve, these hand tools. You will get better, faster, really, really quickly if you just give yourself chances to practice. So, this time, go ahead and put the other short board in the stack. This time, go ahead and resharpen your pencil because it's probably dull by now. But we're going to do the same exact thing. Mark a line across the top, but then I want you to go ahead and mark a line down there. See how we're building each exercise? Last time the focus was getting you up the top. This time the focus is going to be getting on either side of the line, across the top, and down the face. So go ahead and mark those across in each one of your waist areas. Okay, and now it's time to bring it all together. We're going to start on the far corner using the toe, a very light stroke to get it started. Then we're going to use a full length of our blade to saw across the top. Now we're going to keep it on this corner right here and come down this face, following right next to that line. Remember, when we are done, we want that pencil line to still be there. We are sawing right next to it. If you accidentally take it, no big deal. Do better on the next one. Saw next to the line. Come down the face. If you're far away, no big deal. Do better on the next one until you can get it to the point where you're sawing right next to it, all the way down, riding it up, and the pencil line is still there. Now, two things I kind of want to point out to you. This saw we are using is not designed for this kind of work. This is a carcass saw. It's designed to cut across the grain. Though in a pinch it can work in this situation, and it's why I chose a carcass saw for the entire series versus having a either a tenon saw or a sash saw or even a dovetail saw, which are all designed to strictly go rip cuts. This is not as good in a ripping situation, but it's great in a crosscut situation. A rip saw is better here, but it is markedly worse in a crosscut situation. So this is best of both worlds, so to speak. If you were to have a dedicated joinery saw for this kind of work, such as maybe a sash saw or a dovetail saw, not only would it be easier starting, smoother running, but more likely it'll be even straighter. But if you can get the job done to the accuracy we are doing here, with this saw, you're going to be that much better when you get a better saw. Now, you feel you still need more practice, remember, you still have the fourth side that you can work on. we're not touching this. But for clarification purposes, we're going to use that side for the next demonstration. We are now going to cut the actual joints, and I want you to notice where the X's are, because that's the waste material. So in this example, I want you to saw next to the line up here, but don't take the line. Next to the line here, but don't take the line. So you're sawing on the side of the line that is to the waste side, and that's going to be a very common practice in all of your woodworking. So we come up, just like all those exercises, we move the saw over with our index finger, bring it over right where we are. We lighten its load so we can get it started just the way we want. Now you see how it's kind of right there, and if you look right there you can see the indentations. Here's a trick. Those indentations are coming from the speed gravity drops down. So if I were to put it in there and change the speed as I come back, all of a sudden it doesn't drop down as far. And can you hear it? It's getting smoother and smoother because I'm changing the vibration frequency. So now that I have that, I can progress forward, focus, and sawing right next to that line until I hit the baseline, and then riding it up. There we go. The pencil line is left, but there's nothing white next to it. This might seem like an excessive amount of work to cut joints. This is a learning exercise. Next time, all you need to do is mark the line and saw to the line. Gee, where have we heard that before? When you've done that for all the boards, now we get to work on our chisel skill. Now, normally when I'm chopping, I actually make a slight adjustment to my chisel. Here's the 1/2 inch chisel I told you we'd be using most of the time in this episode. And it's sharpened to my normal 30, 27, 25 degrees, whatever. But I've always found that when you are chopping, that's kind of the most brutal aspect of edge interaction with grain that there can be. And if your edge is too low, it's just going to get all bent up. So a lot of times what I would do is I will get my high grit sharpening stone and just a couple passes. I get to my normal level and I just crank it up a tad bit. 1, 2, 3. And that just changes the very tip. It's kind of like a micro bevel. Maybe you can see it in the reflection. You know, you will have the main bevel right there, and then just towards the tip you might see a slight change in the light reflection right on that end. So just, it's a fraction of a millimeter. That's a little bit steeper angle, and it tends to give you a little bit more durable edge. Then I would just put my strope out and leave it here. And we're going to be stroping quite a bit. So now when you chop, you don't actually want to chop with the grain this way, because it's hard to tell direction of the chisel going perpendicular when you're looking at it on the face. It's actually much easier to tell it when you're face on. So using the hard end of your mallet or some other mallet, what we're going to do is we're going to place our chisel about 1/3 of the way back. Then just give it a good hit. Now, see how the fibers just totally broke up? That's one of the advantages of doing all these cross cuts, is it just destroys the fibers. And that, well, normally I would take a coping saw and cut up right here. But since these are already destroyed, we can actually just work our way back. So once again, strike. Now I'm going to come back a little bit farther this way, strike again, and notice we got to go a little bit deeper. Come back a little bit farther and strike again. Notice I'm still a long ways away from that line created by my marking gauge. So then just progress over, going a little deeper each time, until you're maybe a 1/16 away from that line. Then we're going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Start about halfway, and looky there. All of a sudden stuff starts flying off. Come back a little bit farther. So here it is in real time. A quick stroping to reestablish that edge. Take off the burr on the back, come back over maybe 1/3 of the way down, give it a few strikes. 1, 2. Come back over 1/3 of the way down, a few strikes. Work my way back about halfway to the line, few strikes, few strikes. Notice I've only gone about halfway through the end. Come back over. Okay, right there. A few strikes. Blast it through. There we go. And then come back about halfway to the line, down, halfway to the line, down. Now here's a key thing. The reason why we did that was to get rid of all this waste, because if you understand the blade, well, it's not a equilateral triangle or an equal angles on both sides. So as you drive into solid wood, it's trying to equalize the pressure on both sides. So if this angle is a little bit steeper, it's cutting the angle in back, so the chisel will actually move back this way when the pressure is equal on both sides. Now, because we have so little material on this side, the pressure is not equal, so this angle will dominate and it will go straight down. So at this point in time, I can actually drop it into that knife line, which I can feel. Make sure it is either straight up and down or slightly angled back. You do not want it to this way, because that will create a hump, and that is one reason why we are looking at it in this angle. And then just strike halfway down. Come back over, find your knife line, strike halfway down. Flip it over, make sure nothing's underneath it. Come back, find your knife line or your marking gauge line, strike down, and it goes really, really fast once you get into that pattern of work. And then you can just kind of clean up any schmutz you have in there. So, now that you've got the last of them chopped out, well, now we need to transfer the lines. And the tip I'm about to show you is something I've learned strictly from experience, because I'm an idiot and I can't remember anything and I screw up all the time. So, these are, even though they're cosmetically identical, there might be slight variations in here. So we want to fit them to their corresponding joint in this box we're creating. And this is the same technique if you were to advance this kind of application, make dovetails, because the only difference is adding those angles. So what I want you to do is orient your box. Now in our design, one end is going to be smooth, the other end you're going to feel the bandsaw marks, because this is the reference side, and that's just what we made it parallel with the bandsaw. So what I would do is find the better sides of all your boxes, whether you have a little chip out or maybe you got offline a little bit somewhere, and put those to the outside, because that's what people will see. And then pick the better side of each one of your boards, and once again putting the smooth reference side down. And go ahead and position your boards the way they will be in your box. And now label all the corners. Now you don't want to put the label directly on the corner, because you're about to cut that off. So I just typically would do letters, and I just get it close. This is the rough side, so you know you're actually going to put another tool to this anyway, so these marks will be coming off at a later date. Then take the long boards and add your baseline all the way around this time, not just on the faces but on the edges too. Now this next step, you're going to feel stupid. Trust me. Just do it this way. It will eliminate so many problems of you getting one board reversed compared to that one, and then the whole box not going together. So what I'm going to do is I want to cut this corner. So I'm going to take these boards, I'm going to keep them together. All the way over here, then position it. That way I know they will go together properly. Okay. So that it is flush with your tabletop. I'm actually using my foot underneath so I can use my foot to raise it up and lower it down until I get it just the way I want, right there. And then tighten up your vise. So that gets it nice and flat. And then you can bring this board over. And remember me talking about wanting to have these solid on the edges? That allows me to flush it up on the side. And then I can resharpen my pencil and transfer the lines to both sides, making sure I get the tip into the corner, not just do it like this. Get that tip into the corner and transfer those lines. Now here's an incredibly important point. Can you see the lead of this pencil right here? Well, it's obviously not going underneath this piece, so it's right on top. So if you were to actually remove that lead whenever you were sawing, you are actually removing a piece of the wood that needs to slide up here. So that is why routinely we always leave the line when we are cutting stuff out, because that is actually part of the wood that makes us a gap-free joint. So then just loosen the vise, raise it up, transfer those lines down, and saw it just like the other ones you did, making sure you leave that pencil line. And always stay on the waist side. The only difference though is that on these very corner pieces, you get to cut them off. You don't have to chop them off. Remember, you have that baseline going all the way around. And you can do that one in your twin screw, but notice I'm kind of putting it in at an angle because I want this corner to span on both sides of the screws so that it won't kind of flex as I am going around. Just tighten it up. Yes, that means you're going to be sawing not plumb to gravity, but I think you can handle it. Now, as you finish each piece, though granted I had it chopped up, these two, I save all the chopping till you do it all at once. But put them back where you found them. Put them back where you found them. Make sure all your numbers line back up. That way, when you take the next piece, you know everything is going to work out fine. So rinse and repeat. Chop out the waste just like you know how to do. And when we come back, we'll glue it together. Now that it's all cut, you know you just want to kind of pre-assemble it or dry assemble it. So come over, grab your pieces, make sure they're in the right order, and just press down on them to assemble them together. Don't be afraid of lightly tapping it, but if it doesn't want to go, don't force it. Take it apart and look on the board to see if there's any kind of compression. That compression will tell you where it's too tight, and then just kind of use your chisel or a Sloyd knife or something and just take off where it's too tight. That's all you need to do. Now if you cut a joint and it's too loose, don't stress about it. I purposely cut one of these corners on the wrong side of the line because it's going to be a common error in there when you build these. So, I mean, this is just way too loose, but we can still make it structurally sound because of the nature of a box joint. Now I apologize for breaking here. It's just in editing, this was the most convenient area, because our next step, we begin playing around with that $40 block plane. And I'm going to show you how this will save you thousands of dollars over your career as a woodworker in sandpaper. Because we begin the aspect of the make pretty of our project at this point in time. And in part 2, we will be doing the final assembly, glue up, and pegging of our box joint jig so that this thing is rock solid. You're going to have to destroy it to take it apart, even if you use no glue whatsoever. And that's kind of the idea behind a very solid mechanical joint. And that's what we're going to be exploring in the next episode. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, but please remember, content creators like me kind of do this on a value for value proposition. So if you enjoyed this, or you see the value in this kind of series for other people who are learning the craft, maybe check out down in the description not only the links for the other classes that expanded on some of the things like sawing techniques and stuff, chisel techniques, but also there are ways you can help subsidize all the effort, help pay for material, and pay for the time behind the in front of the camera or in front of the computer editing. There are a lot of ways you can help us out, even if it is just sharing our channel. And in the end, I always want you to remember that this kind of stuff is worth the effort to learn, because you get to create stuff and share it with others. Y'all be safe and have fun. See you next time.